If you're having a difficult time expressing your own ideas on the guitar, it might be because you're relying a little too heavily on the shapes that we see on the fretboard. So, when we learn guitar, you learn a C chord and you would memorize the shape that your finger is making on the fretboard to make that C chord, right? You memorize a G chord. It's the shape, right, with all the chords. You can think about the chord boxes maybe that you learned these chords from. It's a literal geometric shape on a piece of paper. Same with the scales. When people learn their pentatonic scales, they learn the shape of the fingers across the fretboard. Now, I'm not knocking shapes of the fretboard because the being able to see the fretboard in that way is one of the languages that guitarists must be able to speak. It's the way that we interface with our instrument, or it's one of the ways that we can interface with our instrument. And it's part of what makes the guitar so special is that you can learn it and you can play other people's songs and get to the point where you're making music simply by learning shapes. Clarinet players, they don't have that same luxury. Piano players, you can kind of start to see some shapes, but once you start changing keys, it becomes a lot more complicated. And it's interesting because the same thing that makes the guitar easy for us to pick up and teach ourselves how to play, how everything's based on shapes, is the same thing that really kind of keeps us in that intermediate plateau where we have a difficult time breaking out of those shapes, right? That's what everybody says. They all say like, oh, I want to break out to the next level, or I want to break out of these pentatonic boxes. Like, how do we break out of these shapes? And it's by becoming proficient in the other language that proficient guitarists, need to be able to be proficient in. So we've already talked about one way that we interface with our guitar is by the shapes on the fretboard. The second way that we can interface with our guitar is by being able to see the fretboard in musical terms. So musical terms being the notes of the fretboard. Do you know all of the notes across the fretboard? Do you understand that an A minor pentatonic scale has the notes A, C, D, E, G, and A? And in addition to actually having those notes, and not just with the scales, but with your chords, C, E, G, C, E to make up a C chord. And if we're playing a G major 7 sharp 11, do you understand that it's G, F sharp, B, C sharp, F sharp? So this is fully applicable. This is something that you continue to study for a very long time. It's not just like a one and done thing. This is a practice that we continue to practice. Understanding not just the names of the notes, what are the names of the notes on the fretboard, but also understanding how those notes function. And what that really is it's scale degrees and it's chord tones. And explaining exactly what scale degrees and chord tones are is a little bit out of the scope of this video. I don't want this to be like a 3-hour long video. But for example, it's like we all understand when people say, play me something in the key of A. It's like, okay, if I played in the key of A, we do A minor pentatonic, everybody's favorite's first scale. We understand that the root of that scale is A because it's called an A minor pentatonic scale. So it's like, okay, we have the root. We know our root is A. But do you know where all of your roots are? And do you know where all of your roots are no matter what position that you're playing it in? So when you play it here, do you understand that you have a root here, and a root here? When you're playing the A minor pentatonic scale up here, do you understand that you have your root here and your root here in every position? And it's not just the roots. It's, do you know where your minor third is? Do you know where the fifth is? And so on and so forth. So each of these notes have a function. And what that function is the scale degrees or the chord tones. When we play a chord, like earlier I was playing that G major 7 sharp 11, I told you what the notes were. So the notes were G, F sharp, B, C sharp, F sharp. Well, those notes also have chord tones. We have the root, so the root is G, and that makes sense because it's called a G chord, right? So the root of the G chord would be a G note. That's where the name of the chord comes from, is from the note, right? Is from the root note. So we have G, and then we have a 7th, and then we have a 3rd, and then we have our sharp 11, and then we have our 7 again. So you can have the 7th in there twice. There's no problem with that. Actually, in another chord that we know and love, our C chord, we've got some notes that repeat. So for example, we have our root, we have our 3rd, we have our 5th, then we have another root, then we have another 3rd. And being able to understand the chord tones is really important, because if you want to take the things that you know and then alter them to make them more of an expression of what you yourself are hearing, you have to understand what the elements are that we're dealing with. For example, if I wanted to take the C chord and I wanted to make it a C add 9 chord, because that was the sound that I was hearing in my head, first of all, I have to understand what a C add 9, what that even means. And then I have to know that I can look for my root, I can move that root up 2 frets and make that a 9 so that I can have my C add 9. Now, I know I'm talking very quickly, and I'm sure that if you're not super familiar with a lot of these terms, they might sound really confusing. But I want you to think about the principle, just simply the principle of what I'm talking about here, is that if you're in a position where you're finding it difficult to express your own ideas on the guitar and you're tired of just kind of rifling through the same shapes, then we need to start developing another perspective on the fretboard. And it's not that the new perspective replaces the old perspective, it's that the new perspective informs the old perspective. And that's really what proficient guitar players are able to do. They're able to see the fretboard in shapes, and they're able to see the fretboard in musical terms. Because when we hear music, we don't hear music as shapes on the fretboard. We hear music in musical terms. When we hear a beautiful C add 9 chord, we're hearing the sound of those notes and the way that those notes are interacting with each other. We're not hearing a geometrical shape. We're hearing the function of music, which I smile as I say this because it's just so beautiful to me. And it makes me so sad that many guitar players spend their entire life hearing beautiful music, because we can all hear the beauty of music, but since they've only really learned shapes on the guitar, they're just running up and down shapes. And the thing is that when you're just running through shapes, you're not connecting your ear to the things that you're playing. You're just kind of mindlessly, guessing at notes, really, instead of hearing the music in your head that you want to express and then expressing that music either by understanding the scale degrees and playing a beautiful melody, or understanding how chords work and how chord voicings work so that you can produce some beautiful chords and beautiful chord progressions. So again, I know I've been kind of talking super fast. Maybe because I'm excited. It's also very cold. I'm cold. I should probably turn on my heater. Haven't done that yet. But maybe that will help me talk less quickly in the future. I hope that this video was helpful for you, or at the very least kind of gave you a little bit of an insight into a direction to start going in. I mean, first things first, just understand where your roots are, what your roots are. At any given moment when you're playing guitar, just take a second to stop and be like, okay, what key am I in? What chord am I playing? Where are all my roots? That's like baseline, and then from there you can start learning the other functions of all of the other notes as well. And then we can continue to travel down this infinite and joyous journey that is being a guitar player and being a musician, being a musical guitar player. So yeah, hope you found this interesting. If you do have any questions in regards to shapes versus musical concepts, definitely drop them down in the comments below. And I will see you in the next video.